Hello, and welcome to the AP Human Geography Unit 5 review on agriculture and rural land use. I'm Mrs. Jacoby, and we're going to focus on how environment, culture, and economics shape agriculture and land use. Our learning targets for today will be explaining the types of agriculture, identifying agricultural regions, analyzing diffusion of farming, applying the von Thunen model, and evaluating modern agricultural challenges. Let's start out with the most basic question. What is agriculture? Agriculture is producing food from plants and animals. We have two different types of agriculture. We have subsistence agriculture, which is producing for personal use, and we have commercial agriculture, when we are producing crops for sale. We divide both types of agriculture into intensive versus extensive agriculture. Intensive agriculture is generally on very small plots of land with high inputs. In other words, how much work is put into it, and it usually gives a high yield. You're farming in every nook and cranny. Extensive agriculture, on the other hand, is large plots of land with very low inputs or work put in and a lower yield. The first agricultural revolution, also known as the Neolithic Revolution, began about 10,000 years ago, and it is when humans figured out that plants will regrow from seeds or scraps when placed in the ground. Humans also began to domesticate animals for food and labor. So much changed. Permanent settlements happened because once you plant crops, you must stay to protect and then harvest. With permanent settlements came land ownership and trading between villages. We absolutely began to modify the earth to prepare the soils to plant, like cutting down trees to make room. Agricultural hearts in the world started with the Fertile Crescent, once again 10,000 years ago, followed by East Asia, Southeast Asia, Sub-Saharan Africa, and Mesoamerica. Different crops were grown in different areas, and as you can see on the picture, you can see some of the crops that were grown in our agricultural hearths. Grains are the most common plant grown in all the hearths, and that is where we make different breads like wheat and rye. You can also see vegetables like peppers, maize, corn, potatoes, mangoes, and olives. Diffusion of agriculture happened in several ways. Relocation diffusion, where people literally moved and took crops and seeds with them to plant, or expansion diffusion, crops can be spread through purchasing seeds at markets in the modern world, or traders taking things to other places and people trading for them. Crops spread globally, and now crops we didn't grow in the United States can generally grow here now. You might need extra stuff to grow non-native crops, and if it's not the original climate, greenhouses can happen. Rural settlement patterns were created from farming methods. When we talk about nucleated or clustered, the town was in the center and you farmed around the outside of the town. In dispersed patterns, you'd have a lot of houses that were separated by farmland. You might not be able to see your neighbor. And then linear patterns are where all the houses lined up on a road or maybe a river, and the farming then occurs behind the house along a skinny patch. The house being on the road or a river gives the farmer access to transportation to move the crops. Land survey methods come out of rural settlement patterns. Metes and bounds used objects in the environment to delineate the property lines. I own all the way to that river and then down to that big rock. If you remember The Lion King, we own all the light touches kind of thing. Township and range was created by the United States government, and it's very square sections. Look at the map of Iowa, the county map. you'll see almost every county is square. Finally, long lots is from the French. And this is the skinny lots lined up on a road or a river in that linear pattern that we see in housing patterns to ensure that you're farming behind the house and you're using whatever road or river to transport your crops to market. The second agricultural revolution went along with the Industrial Revolution. The first agricultural revolution is when we discovered we could plant crops and they would grow. The second agricultural revolution was the mechanization added to increase the production in farming. Machines happened. Crop rotation was invented. It was all about improving the productivity of the farmers. The Green Revolution occurred later on, 50s, 60s, 70s, and brought chemicals into farming, chemical fertilizers, chemical pesticides, and high yield seeds that were added to agriculture. The goal of the Green Revolution was to increase food production. Every time we have an ag revolution, it's all about increasing food production. The Green Revolution was initially designed to help developed countries increase their yield to feed their citizens, but it was expensive technologies and less developed countries could not afford it. Agricultural regions can contain all types of agriculture, but crops will only grow in certain regions of the world. So the farmers, whether they be commercial or subsistence, will target and grow whatever grows in their region. Commercial farming, as I said before, is selling crops for money, while subsistence farming is feeding you, your family, or your community. Subsistence agriculture generally occurs in less developed countries where there is little to no machinery. You're farming by hand, you're digging holes, you're turning over soil, you're planting seeds one by one. And it includes what we call shifting cultivation, where you move around, burn the soil to get nutrients, you plant for a few years, and then move on. Pastoral nomadism is ranching on a tiny scale to feed your family. You are moving animals around to better pastures so they have grass to eat. And plantation farming occurs in less developed countries, but plantation farming is a special kind of farming because it is commercial farming that takes place in less developed countries, which is why there's an asterisk next to it. Commercial agriculture generally occurs in more developed countries where they have a lot of technology. It includes dairy farming, grain farming, mixed crop and livestock. In other words, you're growing your crops, but feeding your animals, and then you sell animals. Ranching and livestock. Mediterranean agriculture occurs in very specific areas on the west coasts of countries or continents. And then there's plantation farming. Plantation, as I said, is commercial agriculture, but it does take place in less developed countries because of the crops. The crops are only able to grow in tropical regions. We're talking coffee, chocolate, bananas, and countries where these crops grow are generally less developed countries that circle the equator. You can see commercial farming regions on the screen, and they include mixed crop and livestock in A, B, dairy farming, C, grain farming, D, livestock ranching, E, fig, date, olive farming, that's Mediterranean farming, F, commercial gardening and produce, and G, plantation farming. The von Thunen model was created in Germany prior to and during the Industrial Revolution, and it explains land factors or land use based on three factors. The first factor is how far are you from the market? Distance to the market goes toward how much it's going to cost you to get your crops to market. Second, Perishability. All of your crops is important. Crops are going to die. The goal is to get them to market before they do. And finally, transportation costs. How much is it going to cost you to move your crops to market? I have put up the von Thunen model on the screen for you to see the rings. In the very center is where you're going to find your markets to sell your crops. That's where the people are. Surrounding the people, you're going to find your dairy and your horticulture, your fresh fruits, vegetables, and milk. They are very perishable, so they are very close to the people. Outside of that ring, you're going to see the orange ring, which is forests. Forests are used to build houses and furniture, but forests have to be close to the market because lumber very heavy. Outside forestry, you see intensive arable rotation crops. This is where you're going to find grains being grown. The farther out you go, you're going to find less and less perishable crops. And ranching animals are always going to be found at the far outer side of the rings because animals can walk to market. As the farther away you are from the market, the cheaper the land is for farmers, but the distance to move the crops cause transportation costs to rise. It must be balanced to make a profit. Agribusiness came out of the Green Revolution as a way to create large-scale food production and global supply chains to produce food to sell. So it encompasses farming, but also farm-related commercial activities. Commodity chains involved in agribusiness include production steps which lead to the production of food. Steps include actual production, which is growing crops or tending animals to their maturity. Then processing the animals or grain down from its stalks to a simple grain, or cutting the animals into their component parts. Next, you're dealing with distribution. How are you going to get it to consumers? And then consumers are the final steps because that's where consumption of whatever product you're making. A good example of this is Tyson Foods. Tyson Chicken controls the complete process of getting chickens to the consumer. They grow their own feed to feed their chickens. Tyson owns the houses where they process the chickens into whole chickens or chicken parts. They own their own trucking companies. You can see them on the roads. It's labeled Tyson Foods. They're refrigerated trucks to get the product to market and then putting them into stores so that you and I can go buy chicken to make a fried chicken dinner tonight. Agribusiness also includes financing, research, and insurance to ensure the business runs well. Environmental impacts of farming are varied. It was once said the worst thing that ever happened to the earth was the introduction of farming during the Neolithic farming revolution because it leads to so many things, including deforestation. If you want to farm, you have to cut down trees. Trees produce oxygen for our world, so that's an impact. Soil erosion happens when we remove trees and grasses. Trees and grasses keep the soil from blowing away. But when you're farming, you're getting rid of all that. You're even turning over the soil for planting. And water depletion. Water depletion happens because you must water your plants to help them grow. Nut trees in California, almonds especially, take so much water to grow nuts that they deplete the water very fast. Greenhouse gases from farming accounts for 26% of global greenhouse emissions. Water pollution in agriculture has pesticides. Agriculture has fertilizer that can wash into our waterways. And biodiversity loss. If you're in a forest, you're going to have a lot of creatures. If you're cutting down the forest, you're losing those creatures' habitats. So we're losing that biodiversity in favor of cows or pigs or corn. Sustainability is how we can make agriculture sustainable so it doesn't have as much impacts on the earth. Crop rotation is a big thing. When you rotate crops, some of the crops steal nutrients from the soil, but some crops give nutrients back to the soil. So if you can rotate those crops one year, put in a crop that takes nutrients, the next year you put in a crop that returns the nutrients, that's a way to save the soil. Organic farming is doing it without the chemical pesticides or fertilizers in chemical form and using natural fertilizers like cow manure, chicken manure. And then conservation includes working to use renewable energy sources, water management, drip irrigation to conserve water. So there's a bunch of different ways that we can make farming sustainable. Food security includes availability of food, the access to food, and the affordability of food. There's something that we talk about called a food desert. And food deserts are areas where fresh fruits and vegetables are not readily available. And this is a problem. If a person lives in a food desert, they're stuck eating whatever is there, especially if they have no transportation. Not really the only thing they might have to eat is McDonald's or convenience store food. And eating that all the time without fresh food can lead to health problems and other issues over time. Challenges of agriculture include how to deal with climate change. As I said before, farming leads to greenhouse gases. With population growth, we keep turning areas we farm into developments. So we went from cutting down trees to make farmland. Now we're destroying farmland to build houses for population growth. That's a problem. And of course, land degradation involves turning land from fertile to not fertile. How do we keep our land from being destroyed? Women in agriculture are the key labor force globally. More women farm than anyone else, and more women farm in subsistence farming in less developed countries than in more developed countries. Women are more likely to be growing on small plots of land and growing enough food to support their families. There are women farmers in commercial agriculture in more developed countries. Back in my mid-20s, I lived and worked on a farm. I drove tractors and did all the farm's work, including planting, harvesting, and feeding cows. So women are in farming and commercial in more developed countries, but they are more likely to be working as subsistence farmers just trying to survive. Let's look at some questions. Question 1. Which agriculture type is most labor intensive? Is it A, ranching, B, plantation, C, subsistence, or D, commercial? I'll give you 10 seconds. Please make your choice. If you chose C, subsistence, that is correct. That is the most labor intensive of all the farming. You're not having machines to help you with the work. Question 2. The von Thunen model focuses on which? A, climate, B, population, C, migration, or D, distance to the market. I'll give you another 10 seconds. Please choose the best answer from the four choices given. If you chose D, distance to market, you're correct. This is one of the choices for the von Thunen model that focuses the other costs of transportation and perishability of crops. Question number 3. The Green Revolution increased A, food production, B, migration, C, climate change, or D, urbanization. You got 10 seconds to make your choice. If you chose A, food production, absolutely correct. It added chemical fertilizers, chemical pesticides to try to add hybrid seeds in an attempt to increase the food supply, especially for less developed countries. And finally, question 4. One of the 4 pillars of food security is A, cost, B, availability, C, choice, or D, growing season. Take 10 seconds to make your choice. If you chose B, availability, you're correct. Availability, access, cost, those things are important when it comes to food security. FRQ practice. This says explain how location influences cultural land use. Explain, of course, describe it completely, add those examples. In this case, you can talk about climate or environment to grow certain crops. That's location certain. Locations you can grow certain things, and you can talk about being close to the market for your transportation, being able to get crops to market. So you can look at growing perishable crops close to people so you can get them to market. You can talk about how long lot being on rivers for transportation, or that certain fruits like bananas will only grow in tropical climates to answer that question. Make sure you know the key vocabulary: subsistence, growing for family; commercial, growing for money; agribusiness, big corporations are farming instead of family farms; the von Thunen model, understanding perishability, distance, cost; and the Green Revolution, designed to help less developed countries grow crops to feed their populations. One quick final review: agriculture depends on the environment and economics to grow what you can grow, what you can afford. Farming practices are spatially organized, whether they be clustered, linear, dispersed. Technology changes food production. The second agricultural revolution, adding machines. The green revolution, adding chemical products. You should be able to define subsistence in commercial agriculture. Know the impacts of agriculture, of the green revolution, and understand and make sure you know the rings of the von Thunen and where things sit. Thank you for watching. Please be on the lookout for video number 6, urbanization patterns and processes. Have a great night.